everybody. I'm Dr. Catherine May. I partnered up with Jessica Leichtweisz, and we are the Behavior Bosses. And tonight we are bringing to you task list H, which is selecting and implementing interventions. And we're going to dive right into some of those questions. Question 1, little Jacob was a 3-year-old boy with ASD and was new to ABA therapy. His mom had taken an initiative to get him in-home therapy. As the therapist arrived, mom noticed she has bubbles, Play-Doh, and race cars. Mom asked what those items were for, and the therapist responded, for reinforcement. Mom was upset and asked if she was planning to bribe her son. This misconception could be best explained by which of the following? A, reinforcement can be transitory. B, reinforcement can be temporary. C, reinforcement can be confused with bribery. D, reinforcement can be affected by behavior contrast. As sometimes we have questions where the writing is on the wall, right? So here, C is your best answer. Reinforcement can be confused with bribery. So here, we want to look at the unwanted effects of reinforcement. In this scenario, mom thought that those items that the behavior therapist had brought were to bribe her son because there was a misconception between bribery and reinforcement, right? So we want to remember as practitioners, we want to continue to educate families, other professionals that we're working with, and so forth. Now let's review some of the options that were not the correct answer. Reinforcement can be transitory. What does it mean when reinforcement's transitory? It means that reinforcement changes as we change as individuals, right? As our clients change as individuals. What was maybe once reinforcing is not always going to be reinforcing. Maybe little Leslie loved Barbie dolls last week, but you know what? They're not reinforcing this week, and we're on to bubbles. So it's our job as practitioners to ensure that we are constantly varying those reinforcers so that our clients don't get satiated on maybe a past reinforcer or a reinforcer that's no longer effective. For B, reinforcement can be temporary. That's an unwanted effect of reinforcement, as when reinforcement's being enacted or implemented, it's going to work. But when you remove the reinforcement procedure, it's no longer going to work because the effects of reinforcement are temporary. And the last one, D, reinforcement can be affected by behavior contrast. This is a true fact, and I did see someone put that in. Yes, that's an unwanted effect of reinforcement and extinction and punishment. So it's a good idea to make note of that. However, it's not what the scenario question is targeting here. So we always want to use the facts within the scenario question to find your best answer. So again, our best answer is C. And we're moving right along to question 2.
All right, guys. So let's look right at this here. It says Noah is a 12-year-old boy who engages in physical aggression when frustrated. He is selectively mute, and the BCBA is working on increasing his vocal skills. He lives with his mom, grandmother, 2 siblings, and 3 cousins. Which of the following would you ensure is part of the treatment plan? A, having family members interact with him throughout the day. B, recommending speech therapy at a clinic to avoid distractions. C, limit nose environment during sessions to the kitchen area. And D, ensure that the toys used during sessions are not shared with his cousins and siblings. All right, perfect. So let's go over this. So the answer here is going to be A, right? You want to have your family members interact with him throughout the day. So this is one of those things where you really just kind of have to use common sense and go through this question to see which of these things makes the most sense. So when you have family members interacting with him throughout the day, right, it's telling us in the scenario, you want to use all the information in the scenario, is that he's selectively mute, right? So we're working on increasing his vocal skills. So that means we want to create as many opportunities as possible for him to be comfortable with the people around him, but also for him to have that opportunity to request, to interact, to talk. We want to increase those opportunities. And that's really going to be the main thing and our main focus, right? So when it's talking about then it is recommending speech therapy at a clinic to avoid distractions. That is maybe something we would want to do, right? But again, if we're talking about wanting him to be able to interact with his family, increase his vocal skills, well, then having more contrived setting might actually not be beneficial. Again, limiting nose environment during sessions to the kitchen area. Again, we don't necessarily want to do that because we don't want to isolate someone who is struggling to interact with other people. Again, that would be very limiting, right? We know that as behaviorists, we want to teach them in a way that the children are going to experience reinforcement in their natural environment. So if we do things in a more contrived setting, it may be more difficult for someone to generalize skills, especially if they're already struggling with being selectively mute. And again, ensuring toys used during the sessions are not shared with his cousins. Well, this may seem like a good answer because, yes, it is saying that he engages in some sort of physical aggression when he's frustrated. But in the same sense, if he does live with his cousins and he lives with his siblings, then we're going to need to work on this anyway, right? Because it's like not realistic that he's never going to have to really kind of navigate playing with his cousins and siblings and sharing toys. So it's something that we would want to promote and we would want to work on in sessions. So that's why A here is your best answer.
All right, guys. So for question 3, Leslie is a 4-year-old with ASD who has a limited verbal repertoire and engages in screaming outbursts when she is denied preferred activities or tangibles. Leslie's mom has reduced her work hours so that she can be as involved as possible with Leslie's treatment. As a BCBA on the case, you, A, allow Leslie's mom to sit in on sessions, but assure her that only credentialed behavior analysts and technicians can implement the treatment plans. B, you provide parent training to Leslie's mom weekly and involve her in the treatment plans. C, you politely guide Leslie's mom to observe sessions, but not to intervene. And D, ask for a written document stating Leslie's mom wants to participate in therapy sessions. All right, you guys. So here, your best answer is going to be B. You provide parent training to Leslie's mom weekly and involve her in the treatment plans. And this coincides with H9, collaborate with others who support and or provide services to clients, right? We need to collaborate with our mediators. That is first and foremost, right? If our mediators are not involved and we don't have social validity for our interventions will not work. So let's take a look at some of these other answers here. So we have A, allow Leslie's mom to sit in on sessions. Well, that sounds good, right? But assure her that only credentialed behavior analysts and technicians can implement treatment plans. Absolutely not, right? We need our stakeholders and mediators to support our behavior interventions by learning how to implement those plans and doing so in various environments, right? B, you provide parent training to Leslie's mom weekly and involve her in treatment plans. Yeah, that's our answer, best answer. C, you politely guide Leslie's mom to observe sessions, but not to intervene. We want to engage parents as often as possible. So we may start with the observations, right? And then when they get more comfortable, have them engage in the sessions. And then through different training procedures, we'll rehearse with them, offer feedback, and then have them implement those interventions. D, ask for written documentation stating Leslie's mom wants to participate in therapy sessions. Not necessary when it comes to mediators and stakeholders. We do want them involved as much as possible.
All right, guys. So here it says, Jerry is an 8-year-old client with ASD and ODD. He engages in a variety of challenging behaviors, including property destruction, emotional outbursts, and aggression. Jerry's mom is not willing to implement reinforcement for incompatible behaviors at home. As the BCBA in the case, what is the best course of action to take? A, refer to another BCBA due to resource constraints. B, terminate services due to resource constraints. C, explain the science of ABA to Jerry's mom. And D, include a different intervention that Jerry's mom will adhere to. So when it comes to referring to another BCBA due to resource constraints, that's really more talking about, again, resource constraints means you don't have the resources to fulfill the contract. So let's just say, for example, you're a BCBA and you just have a baby, you get pregnant, have a baby. You might have to give some of your cases to another BCBA, right? So we don't abandon clients, but sometimes we do need to refer our clients to another BCBA. So that would be an example more of a resource constraint. Again, terminate services to resource constraints. The resource constraints also could be part of parents are not carrying out interventions. That could potentially be considered a resource constraint, whether the parents don't have time to fulfill the services or they don't have this, we don't have the social validity, right, of them carrying out the services. But again, here, it's not saying that mom is not willing to do anything. So we're probably not going to jump to terminating services. We're probably going to try something else first. Explaining the science of ABA to Jerry's mom. Now, yes, we do want to explain what we're doing in very parent-friendly language here. So C potentially could be an answer, but we always want to look for what's the best answer. So what's the best answer here? Here it says in D, include a different intervention that Jerry's mom will adhere to. This is your best answer because in task list H3, we talk about choosing interventions based on social validity, right? Meaning that the people in the person's life who are carrying out the interventions are willing to carry them out. Now, if a parent is totally against ABA, they're not willing to do anything in terms of carrying out any of our interventions, then yes, we would then terminate services. But oftentimes there's just really comes down to us needing to find something that works for the families. You know, in a perfect world, when you first get your first start into this field, you think there's one way to do things, but oftentimes there's more than one way to do something. And there is an intervention that will work for a family. And really the role of what we're doing as BCBAs is finding that intervention that's actually going to work for families rather than, you know, just jumping to terminating services. So here you're really looking for that answer that you're going to include a different intervention. Obviously, that's still appropriate. Then will still serve the same goal that Jerry's mom will be able to carry out.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Okay, I guess what threw me off was because it said Jerry's mom is not willing to implement reinforcement for an incompatible behavior. And so it threw me off. I said, well, if she didn't want to use an incompatible behavior, then she won't want to use a different intervention either.
So sometimes we read information into a question that's not actually present in the question. And this is like a perfect example of how we only want to answer questions based upon the information that's in there. So let's just say, for example, and I actually had this happen to me today, believe it or not, and Dr. Katie wrote these questions and they're great questions and they happen in real life. And she didn't even know that this happened to me today. So I had a parent who told me that their daughter was spitting and playing with her spit. And the first thing I thought was, okay, we're going to write an intervention for an incompatible. We're going to not incompatible. I guess it was technically it was incompatible, but I said, okay, we're going to redirect her to an alternative behavior that she can't do the same time as spitting. So yeah, an incompatible behavior, right? And I had her playing with water because she couldn't spit in her hands and play with water at the same time. And the mom was like, no, I just got a new carpet. There is no way we're playing with water. And so I wasn't going to jump to, well, let me terminate services, right? I just said, okay, totally get it. You just got a new carpet. I'll come up with another thing we can do. And so now we're going to be using a DRO procedure instead. And if she doesn't play with water in the, you know, for whatever X amount of time, then we're going to give her access to her iPad. And mom was totally on board with that, right? So there's like a real life example of how a parent was like, no to DRI. And this literally happened this afternoon for me. And I just was like, okay, no big deal. We can just jump to something else if it doesn't work for you. So sometimes it's not, sometimes when we're reading in questions like this, we like assume the worst, like the parent is totally against ABA and they're not going to do anything. But sometimes it's as simple as they got a new rug and they don't want to play with water on the new rug, right? So don't read anything into the question that's not there.
I think it just threw me off those two words, the incompatible and then the different. In D, it was like different intervention. And then in the scenario, it says incompatible. So
are you familiar with differential reinforcement of incompatible behavior in the term? Because I can go over that. That might help.
Yes, I am familiar with it. So she just didn't want to use, so you're saying you can use something else outside of the DRO, the DRI, or is that what you're saying?
Yeah, differential reinforcement of incompatible behavior is when we provide a person with an activity they can do, right, that serves the same function, but they can't do the behavior we're reducing at the same time. So in the example I gave, the girl was spitting on her hands and rubbing that around. Well, if she's playing with water, she can't physically do that at the same time, right? Or if a child is hand flapping and we have to clap their hands, that's just a really easy visual example. They can't clap their hands and hand clap at the same time, right? So if a parent doesn't want to do that, well, then there's a lot of other things we can do. We can use differential reinforcement of other behavior, right? We can do non-contingent reinforcement. There's a lot of different procedures that we can use that would also help to reduce the behavior. So here, it's saying incompatible and different, but those aren't really keywords for each other. Incompatible is just referring to the fact that, it's when you're using a reinforcement, when you're redirecting a child to a behavior that serves the same function that they can't do at the same time as the target behavior you're reducing. And then you want to reinforce that behavior. And then really when it's talking about a different intervention, you can just substitute that word for like another intervention or something else that works for the parents. Or it could have said in D, include an intervention that has more social validity, or include an intervention that Jerry's mom wants to use. So you could even just take out the word different and it wouldn't change the answer there. But you are going to get questions on your exam that have words that might confuse you. And it's really just kind of looking to see like, what are they actually asking me is how you're going to get the answer when that happens.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Does that help?
Definitely, yes.
Okay, perfect.
Wonderful. Question 5. A second grade student will not sit during circle time lessons. He struggles to sit on the rug, but does not have issues sitting in his chair during other lessons. He lacks social skills, but does listen to the teacher and paraprofessional typically and enjoys teacher attention. What is the most effective intervention to have the student sit during circle time? A, have peers encourage the student to sit during circle time. B, use a dependent group contingency to reinforce the class when the student sits during circle time. C, pair the student up with a peer who sits nicely during circle time and use the buddy system as reinforcement. Or D, use most-of-least prompting and shaping for sitting during circle time using contingent teacher attention. D is our best answer. Use most-of-least prompting and shaping for sitting during circle time using contingent teacher attention. So this is the best intervention since he already has the ability to sit. Now the teacher and or paraprofessional can use most-of-least prompting and shaping to show him how to now take that sitting ability and transfer it to the rug. And the student will then receive that reinforcement in the form of teacher attention, as the scenario states that he enjoys teacher attention and he's typically responsive to the teacher and the paraprofessional. So now let's go through some of the other options. Now, when you're utilizing your test taking strategies, I want you to look at how the question is posed. What is the most effective intervention to have the students sit during circle time? So that means even if you do find something that you feel might be a good answer, you want to compare it to make sure you're picking the most effective. So A, have peers encourage a student to sit during circle time. That's not bad, but also the scenario doesn't talk to us about how reactive he is to peers. And it also isn't enough, right? He's having trouble sitting during circle time. He will not sit during circle time. So just having his peers encourage him may not be enough. B, use a dependent group contingency to reinforce the class when the student sits during circle time. This sounds good as well, but we don't have enough information from our scenario. Remember that everything you need is going to be from the scenario. So we would have gotten indication at this point that a group contingency would work based on the fact that he would be responsive to his peers. So again, that was never stated in the scenario, which goes along with my explanation for C. Pair the student up with a peer who sits nicely during circle time and use the buddy system as reinforcement. That is a very good answer, but when we're looking for most effective, we want to use the information they gave us. So since we're going to use contingent teacher attention, and we see right here that it says he enjoys teacher attention, that's going to be our better answer between C and D.
Oh, there we go. So that actually does bring us to the end of our presentation for tonight. I really hope you guys found this super helpful. We also wanted to let you know that Dr. Catherine and I partnered to put out a 5th edition task list course. If you want to check that out, you can check it out at tasklist5.com. That's again just tasklist5.com.